Well, hey, everybody, I'm Paul, one of the pastors here at The Journey, and we're in the third week of a series that we're calling Reset. I grew up in a day and age when, man, it was horse and buggy, no grocery stores, grow your own food. Okay, not that old, but it might feel that way when I tell you that I grew up in a day and age when Sundays were basically for family, rest, and church. Stores weren't open, most restaurants weren't open. No alcohol was sold. Youth sports weren't happening on Sundays. School activities didn't happen on Sundays. They actually had a thing called blue laws that kept those things from happening, that made sure that it was a day of rest. But then in the late 80s, those laws began to be struck down. And of course today, it's 24/7, right? Like most stores are open 7 days a week. Most restaurants open 7 days a week. Some stores open 24/7. You can shop online at any time, any place. And it has affected our lives, right? Weekend sports, it is travel and it's weekends away, and school activities happen on Sundays. And so it has just created a different environment where there really is no time off, where it is consistently going and going and going, and we don't actually oftentimes rest at all. It was a different time back then. It's a different time today. And some people would say for good, some people would say for bad, but it certainly is different. Well, as we head into this summer, summer gives us a different opportunity, an opportunity for many of us to reset, to have a change of pace, to do things differently. And so we want to take this month and really have that reset in our lives. God made us to rest. He developed rhythms of rest. We've looked at in this series how he created in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. When the Israelite people were moving out of Egypt and into the promised land, God provided food for them for 6 days. On the seventh day there was no food. They were supposed to collect 2 days on the sixth day, so that the seventh day they could rest, that they could remember him. God developed these rhythms for us because he wants us to flourish. He wants us to experience life to the full. And life to the full is not going to happen when we're constantly tired and constantly going. We need to rest, to have a reset to our life. We're called to not only rest, but to remember and to release, and to have this rhythm of life that can actually bring freedom and peace to our lives, to experience the life that God has for us. As human beings, we are energy machines. We go, 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 but it's like a battery. Our energy is depleting all the time. And we need to recharge those batteries. We've talked about how a car with an oil change, if you just blow past that, and for a lot of us we do, it's like, I need to be productive. I don't have time to do that, or we forget. I don't want to spend the money on it. I'll do it later. But we go way past what that little sticker says on our car. And it's fine if you go maybe a couple thousand miles past or 5,000 miles past, but you start going 10, 15, 20,000 miles past, eventually that oil is going to burn up and your engine will burn out, and it will cost you way more in the end. And like those cars with the oil changes, we too oftentimes do that. We blow past all the warning lights and we just keep going because we're like, I can't stop. I got to keep going. Everything depends on me. I got to be productive. And if we go, 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 eventually we will burn up and burn out, and it will cost us way more, way, way more. We were designed to rest. If we're going to flourish in life, we need to rest. The Bible actually talks about it with a word it calls Sabbath. And we've been talking about that throughout this series. Sabbath was designed by God to be this day of rest, where we rested and we remembered him. Remembered that he was in control, remembered that he's our provider and protector, that he could do in 6 days what we can't do in 7, or what other people can't do in 7. We're called to remember. And then last week we talked about how we're also called to, on this Sabbath, to release. When we take a day to just rest, we're releasing control to God. We're not trying to control ourselves. We're saying, okay, I'm going to trust that God will provide for me, that God is still working and moving in my life and in the lives of others, even while I rest. We release control, at least the illusion of control, And we release it to God and we allow him to do what he does, that God is the one who's working and moving on our behalf. And so we remember his faithfulness and his provision. And so we've been talking about this idea of Sabbath. Today I want to talk about the actual practice of Sabbath. What are we supposed to do, and when are we supposed to do it, and what is that supposed to look like to actually develop a rhythm in our life of rest that can bring freedom and peace to our lives? Well, I want to look to start out at Jesus and an encounter that he had. Now, the interesting thing with Jesus, as we talk about, hey, let's have this rhythm of rest and let's develop practices of rest, is that Jesus, when we see him, seemed to always be breaking the Sabbath, which doesn't seem like a great way to start out when we're talking about like how do we keep a Sabbath? How do we have the day of rest? How do we live with this kind of reset when Jesus is always breaking the Sabbath? But Jesus was breaking the Sabbath because the Pharisees, the religious leaders, were putting all of these man-made rules on this day. They're putting all these different things on it and making it difficult and hard and a burden. And Jesus was saying that the Sabbath, this idea of rest, was to be a blessing, not a burden. And so Jesus was pushing against the man-made rules of the Pharisees. So what should a Sabbath, what should a rest, a reset look like? What should it not look like? I want to look in the book of Mark, chapter 2. It's the second book of the New Testament. It's a biography of Jesus' life. And in Mark chapter 2, verse 23, it says this: One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some of the heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" He answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions." Now, what Jesus' disciples were doing was commonplace. You know, for a lot of the places when you're going from town to town or little village to little village, the paths led through fields and through crops. And so as you walked along, maybe you grab a couple kernels of grain and pop them in your mouth as provision. In fact, the Bible even talked about it. It gave space for that, for people to be provided for as they walked along. But they actually even had some rules with that, which said that you shouldn't use any kind of tool to take some of those grains, because then you could be taking too much and it'd be like stealing from the person who owned the land. And so they were doing what was commonplace, what many people did, which is take a few grains, pop them in their mouths. But the Pharisees had made all of these extra rules on the Sabbath to constitute what was work and what wasn't work. And according to their rules, the disciples were they were going against about 4 different laws just by taking those grains and popping them in their mouth. And Jesus again was pushing against this. So because they were breaking their laws, the religious leaders were angry. They had added again all these different laws, and here the disciples are breaking their laws. Matter of fact, the Sabbath laws that the Pharisees had made was something like 39 different laws. I'll just give you a couple examples of the laws that they made up for what constituted work and what didn't constitute work. Like one, you couldn't shake out your clothes, because if you did and an insect fell out and you killed it, that would be work. You could pour cold water into hot water, but you couldn't pour hot water into cold water. I don't know why. You couldn't bathe. Bathing was forbidden on the Sabbath, because if you got out of whatever it was that you're bathing in and some water got on the floor and you were tempted to clean it up, that would be working. You couldn't move a chair or a table across your floor because it could make a rut in the dirt floor, and that would be like plowing, like farming. Women couldn't look in any kind of a mirror at their reflection, because they would be tempted to want to change their hair or do something. Obviously, I guess they figured the guys, that didn't matter to them. These were just some of the rules that made up the Sabbath rules and regulations. It was ridiculous. And the Pharisees were making it difficult for people to even follow this day of rest. They were actually having to work harder to make sure that they were keeping up with all the regulations. So the Pharisees were mad at Jesus and the disciples for breaking their man-made rules. And Jesus responds to them in verse 25 and verse 26. And it basically says, haven't you ever read the scriptures? And this is like a shot across the bow at the Pharisees, because the Pharisees, they prided themselves in memorizing the scriptures, of being the people that knew the most about the Bible. And Jesus like, haven't you ever read that thing? Man, talk about getting angry. They were furious with Jesus. Like, how dare you question us about the scriptures? And then Jesus reminds them of a story that they knew from 1 Samuel chapter 20, where David, who was the would-be king, was being chased by Saul the king. And David and his men had went into the temple and had taken the consecrated bread that was to be only for the priest, and they ate it because they had a need. Now, David and his men, they broke an actual command from God, whereas Jesus and his disciples, they were just breaking the man-made rules of the Pharisees. And then Jesus says this to them. Mark chapter 2, verse 27 and verse 28. Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. The Sabbath, this day of rest and renewal and recharging, was made for us, to be a blessing to us. Like, God put that into the rhythm of life so that we would remember him, so that we would rest in him, that we would trust him more, and that we would be recharged and refocused. It was his provision and care for us to trust him more, to rest from the hamster wheel of life. Not the way that the religious leaders had done it, which was basically that we were made to keep the rules of the Sabbath. They said, you've got it backwards and you're missing the point. And then he says this. He says, so the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. He says, I trump the rules. I'm bigger than that. And you're missing the point. Listen, the Sabbath, this rest, was meant to be a blessing. But the Pharisees had piled on all these rules and had made it a burden. So the people were working harder and harder and harder than ever just to try to keep those regulations. And it didn't bring more peace and freedom to them like it was supposed to. It actually restricted it. Jesus says, no, you're missing the point. It is so much bigger than all these little rules you're putting on it. You know, in the Old Testament, the Sabbath, before Jesus, it was really about the specific day. But in the New Testament, after Jesus, it was about the specific person, Jesus. In the Old Testament, before Jesus, it was about kind of taking that day and not working. In the New Testament, it was about resting in Christ, not just resting from work. In the Old Testament, it was about the rules to follow. In the New Testament, it was about a relationship with Jesus, and that he's the one that can bring real rest. You know, I did a little bit of a study of looking at the word Sabbath in the Bible. There's actually 116 verses that talk about Sabbath, and there are almost no rules that we see anywhere about what to do on the Sabbath. Now, a lot of those rules are made up by Pharisees that aren't in the Bible. But there's really kind of two main principles that we see over and over and over again that maybe would constitute rules. The first was to cease from working. Like, don't do any work on the Sabbath day. On that rest day, you're not to work. You're to slow down and to change the pace and the rhythm of your life and to trust God that he can provide for you. And then the second thing that we see over and over again is that they're to use that day to remember God, to remember his faithfulness, to remember his provision and his goodness to them, and to trust him in that. And when they did, they could find refreshment for their souls. Those are the rules. That's it. And the Pharisees had made all these different things. And honestly, I grew up in an environment in church where there was like, you shouldn't watch movies, and you shouldn't do this, and you shouldn't do that, and certainly don't go shopping on Sunday. And, you know, there's all these rules to it. Jesus said, no, this is something bigger, and it's not about the rules. It's about this relationship. It's finding real rest for your soul. So Jesus pushed back against the Pharisees, and he invited us to live into a rhythm of rest where we can be refreshed and where we can receive from God. When we talk about that, the journey every once in a while, we'll talk about change of pace plus change of perspective, or equals change of perspective. That a change of place, a change of pace equals a change of perspective. That we can get refreshed and refocused and recharged as we begin to reset how we do life. And the truth is, for most of us, we need a reset. We need a different rhythm to our life because we're burning the candle at both ends, but pretty soon there will be no candle left. In Exodus chapter 31, verse 16 and 17, it's the second book of the Bible. It says this: the Israelites are to observe the Sabbath, celebrating it for the generations to come as a lasting covenant. And it'll be a sign between me and the Israelites forever. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. Resting refreshes us. Now here's the thing, God didn't need to be refreshed. It wasn't like he was like, oh man, I'm so tired, I'm so exhausted, I just need a day off. I need a beach day. I need a personal day, mental health day, like to make sure I'm okay. Like God didn't need that. But he uses this language, this human language that we all can relate to because we do need to be refreshed. We do get tired and worn out. We do get exhausted. We do get burned out. The Hebrew word for refreshed means he took a breath. So God created for those 6 days, and then he took a breath. He paused. He looked around at his creation, all that he had completed, and took joy in it. You know, we use that same kind of language, don't we? Sometimes, man, just take a breath. Right? Like you're going too fast. You have too quick of a pace. You need to slow down. You're so worried. You're so anxious. You know, you're so worked up about all those things. You're running at an unsustainable pace. Take a breath. Right? We need that. When we take a breath, we can be refreshed. We need a reset. And this rest that we can find in God is meant to refresh us physically, spiritually, emotionally. So what does that look like? Well, it's different for each of us. Right? There's no set way that you're to rest and find refreshment for your soul. Everybody's personality and style and season of life will cause it to look differently. But I want to give you some handles and helpful hints so that you can begin to develop a different rhythm for your life. That you can have this kind of rhythm of work and rest, so you can find freedom and peace the way that God wanted you to. It is the way towards human flourishing. It's one of the ways towards human flourishing. It is to experience life the way he designed it, with the rhythms that he designed it to be experienced in. So I want to give you a couple of just helpful hints. First, try to schedule it. Try to schedule a time of rest. Now, maybe it'll be a day for you. Maybe it'll be over a couple of days. Maybe it'll be 6 hours, maybe whatever it might be, but try to schedule it. When does it work for you to consistently kind of take those times to rest? And try to do that even weekly, right? Like, how could I do that weekly? And if you don't one week, don't kick yourself about it. Just get back up and try it again. For me, I try to do Friday 5 p.m. to Saturday 5 p.m. Do I always do that? No. But I try to do that kind of consistently. Like, this is the time that I'm going to be off. This is a time where I'm not going to do any work. Now, sometimes things get in the way, or I've got things I have to do for work, or I get busy with other things. But I want to try to say, okay, this is a block that I'm going to try to rest. What does that look like for you? When would that time be for you? Maybe it's Sundays for you. For Sundays, for me, I'm working, right? But for you, maybe that's your day when you can rest. And again, it doesn't always happen, and that's okay. But try to protect that time. And don't just fill it with activities that get you working again, right? I want to encourage you to turn off your phone, or at least to shut off notifications. And the bigger picture is this: disconnect from distractions. Disconnect from distractions. Now, that might be the phone. I think it is the phone for a lot of people, but it might be other things as well. But we need to learn at least to have one day where the world isn't just screaming at us. So we want to think that we're being restful as we wake up on a Saturday morning and we scroll through Instagram for a half hour because we see a dancing bear, and then we see some little cute puppy videos, which lead to more little cute puppy videos. And all of a sudden, like 45 minutes have passed. And then we flip over to Facebook so that we can feel bad about ourselves, right? We look at someone else's vacation and we see all the friends that this other person has and how their kids are better than our kids. Right? Or we go down a rabbit hole of reels of conspiracy theories and we're just getting angry. Like, that's not really restful. We need to disconnect from the distractions. And again, your distractions might be different, but how can you disconnect from those things so you can actually really rest? Set a schedule, try to set a schedule for your rest, disconnect from the distractions. Secondly, stop working. Stop working. Like, don't work on that day. Don't have your phone ready to work on that day. And it's not a day to do all the work that you don't get paid for. Like, now I got all my other chores, right? So if you take a day to rest, but then you mow the lawn and you got to paint the house and you got to do all these different things, is that really restful? Now, for some, maybe some of that is restful, right? Like, I go out into my yard and I love to weed and water plants and stuff like that. That's restful to me. It's like my mind is, not focused on other things and I'm just kind of quiet in the yard. That can be restful. But what are the things that are restful for you? And what are the things that are work? Don't just pile in other work things that aren't related to your job that you get paid for. You need to be restful. So stop working. Otherwise, you're not really resting. And then I think there's 3 areas to focus on when we take some time to rest. First, relax. Give yourself permission to sleep later, to take a nap, to not exercise that day. Or maybe it is to exercise because that's just relaxing to you, so you go for a run. What's relaxing to you? Maybe it's to read a book or to sit out on your deck. Maybe it's to take a long walk or to go golfing or shopping or whatever it might be. But what is restful to you and relaxing to you? Make sure that you have time in those days to relax, to go at a slower pace. Secondly, remember and reconnect with God. This day of rest or this time of rest isn't meant to just be a couch potato or be lazy. It is ultimately meant for us to remember and reconnect with God, to learn to trust Him more, to realize that we aren't in control, but He is, and He's faithful and good and our provider. And so take some extra time to pray, to read the Bible, to take a walk and listen to God, to be still, to journal or pray a little more. And the truth is, for me, like, there's sometimes when I take my day of rest and I realize I didn't really spend any more time with God than I normally do. And then there's other times where I'm more focused. But it was meant to be a day when we remember Him, where we grow in our trust that He's going to care for us. We reflect on His goodness and His faithfulness. So how can you do that on that day? What are the things that help you connect with God more deeply? Do that on those days, because true rest will put us in a place to reflect and to receive from God. And the truth is, it's learned, right? And so it might feel like 2 minutes or 5 minutes of praying or being still is super long, but if you'll consistently do that, 5 minutes can become 10 minutes, 10 minutes can become 30 minutes. And you can actually begin to slow the pace of your life, which will give you a different rhythm to life that is sustainable, that is energizing, that can recharge you, and that can bring freedom and peace to your life. How can you connect with God? The truth is, it's so hard for us because we've almost conditioned ourselves to live with this constant noise. So listen, we want to relax. We want to remember and reconnect with God. And we want to take time to relate. We were meant for relationship, not religion. And we want to connect in relationships on those days of rest, relationships that fill you up, relationships that encourage you. There's relationships in your life, they sap the energy out of you, and there's others that bring energy to your life. Spend time with those that bring energy. Spend time with those who fill you up and encourage you. You need to relate. So who are those people? And then make effort to hang with them. Listen, this is all going to look different for everybody, but develop a rhythm to rest in your life, real rest, a time to disconnect from the distractions, to set a time, to stop working, and then to relax, to remember and reconnect with God, and to relate with others. You're changing our pace, changes our perspective, and it will help us to refocus on the most important stuff and to experience the kind of flourishing life that God wants us to experience. Again, we are so often running, busy, but ultimately that is depleting our energy. God made us to have a rhythm where we work and we move and we go, but then we rest. And that rest recharges our souls. We need that in our lives. And it's not going to happen if you aren't intentional about it. So be intentional about setting some time to do those things. Experience the life that God has for us. If we don't set new rhythms for our lives, it'll eventually be like that car that blows past the oil changes, and we will burn out, and it will cost you way more emotional turmoil, way more relational chaos. So as we wrap up, I want to give you an opportunity right now to reflect, to take a breath and slow down. And I want to encourage you to get your phone, if you're watching this on some other device, or your computer, or a piece of paper and a pen, because I want you to write down 4 different things, and then I want you to begin to write down under each one of those headings a couple items that can help you begin to get a framework for what a day of rest would look like for you, what a Sabbath could look like for you. Okay, so you ready? Get something to write it down with, get your notes out. Here's question number 1. What's relaxing to you? What's relaxing to you? Maybe it's to take a walk, maybe it's to go golfing, maybe it's to take a nap, to watch a show, to sit on your deck, to work in the yard. What's relaxing to you? Secondly, what relationships fill you up? What relationships fill you up? Who are some of those people that when you're around them, it brings life to you, it encourages you, it doesn't take energy from you? So what relationships fill you up? Just write some of those down. Okay, third question. What day or time frame typically could work for you to have this day of rest? You don't have to set it in stone right now, but what are some times that could work? Maybe for you it's Saturdays or Sundays, or maybe Friday night and Saturday morning. That time could really be a time of rest. Maybe it's during the week. Just write down a few of those times. What could those look like? Okay, so you want to think about what's relaxing to you. What people fill you up. What time would work best for you. And then how can you, or do you best remember God's faithfulness? Or how do you reconnect with God the best? And so maybe for you it's, I reconnect with God the best when I'm alone, when I'm quiet. It's just me and my Bible and my chair in the early morning. Maybe it's when I go for a walk, or I'm still as I sit out by the lake, or whatever it might be. How do you reconnect with God the best? You may write down a few different ideas of that. Let those 4 questions begin to be a framework for you for how you can experience rest on a consistent basis. Again, we're going to stop working. We're going to slow the pace and not just fill it with things that we don't get paid for. Right? We're going to stop working. We're going to take time. We're going to rest. We're going to remember God. We're going to relate to others. We're going to relax. And we're going to enjoy this rhythm of life that God has given to us, and let it begin to recharge you. Let's pray together. God, I pray that you would help us to do just that, to rest, trusting you that you are still at work, that you're still moving, that you're faithful, that you're good, that you're a provider, that you can do in 6 days what we can't do on our own in 7 days. And God, that we would, as we rest, that we would remember your faithfulness, that we would grow in our trust of you, and that you would recharge and refill our souls. God, that we would be able to handle the things that come our way by your grace and kindness and goodness to us. In Jesus' name, amen.